March 1945. A freezing wind sweeps across one of Europe's greatest rivers, the Rhine. For centuries, it had been more than just a river. It was Germany's final shield. Its broad waters stretched hundreds of yards across, its swift current capable of sweeping away men, boats, and tanks alike. Every German officer understood one thing. If the Allies reached the Rhine, Germany itself would be exposed. Machine guns overlooked every crossing. Artillery batteries were carefully hidden in forests. Anti-tank guns waited behind earthen embankments. Entire divisions stood ready to destroy anyone foolish enough to attempt an assault. The German High Command believed they had one overwhelming advantage. The Americans couldn't simply drive across. They would have to build bridges under fire. That process would take hours, maybe days. And during that time, German artillery would destroy everything. It seemed like the perfect defensive position. But there was one thing the German defenders never imagined. They didn't know the Americans had brought an entire fleet of amphibious trucks. Vehicles that could drive down muddy riverbanks, disappear beneath the water, and emerge on the opposite shore carrying soldiers, ammunition, and supplies. They looked strange, almost ridiculous. Many soldiers jokingly called them duck trucks. Officially, they were known as the DUKW. Those 6 letters would soon help change the course of the war. Tonight, we're telling the story of one of America's most overlooked secret weapons. The amphibious trucks that helped break Germany's last great defensive line. Chapter 1: Germany's last natural fortress. By early 1945, World War II in Europe was entering its final chapter. The Battle of the Bulge had failed. Hitler's last major offensive in the West had collapsed. Thousands of experienced German soldiers had been lost. Fuel supplies were nearly exhausted. Factories were being bombed around the clock. Cities lay in ruins. Yet despite everything, German commanders still believed they could stop the Allied advance. Why? Because of geography. The Rhine River. Running nearly 800 miles through Europe, the Rhine had protected Germany for centuries. Roman armies struggled to cross it. Napoleon respected it. Military planners across Europe studied it. In many places, the river stretched more than 400 yards wide. Its powerful current made floating bridges dangerous. Its steep western banks exposed attackers to enemy fire. And on the eastern side, German engineers had prepared defensive positions months in advance. Concrete bunkers overlooked likely crossing sites. Minefields covered approaches. Heavy artillery was carefully hidden beyond the hills. Every bridge had demolition charges. If necessary, the Germans would destroy every crossing themselves. To Allied planners, the Rhine represented the final major obstacle before the heart of Germany. General Dwight D. Eisenhower knew defeating Germany wasn't simply about reaching Berlin. It was about crossing the Rhine quickly, before German forces could reorganize. Time mattered. Every extra day meant more casualties. Every delay allowed German divisions to reinforce defenses. Speed would become America's greatest weapon. Chapter 2: A strange vehicle is born. Years before anyone reached the Rhine, a remarkable idea had already been taking shape. It wasn't designed specifically for Germany. It wasn't built for one battle. Instead, it was created to solve one simple military problem. How do you deliver supplies from ship to shore when there isn't a port? In 1942, American engineers combined 2 very different machines, a heavy military truck and a boat. The result looked almost unbelievable. 6 wheels, a propeller, a waterproof hull, a steering wheel like a truck, yet it floated like a boat. Officially, the military designation became DUKW. Each letter represented an engineering code. D meant the vehicle was designed in 1942. U referred to utility. K identified front-wheel drive capability. W indicated dual rear axles. Most soldiers ignored the technical explanation. They simply called it the Duck. And once they saw it operating, the nickname stuck forever. At first glance, the vehicle appeared awkward. Too tall, too bulky, too unusual. German intelligence reports rarely mentioned it. Many officers dismissed it as another odd Allied transport vehicle. That assumption would prove costly, because underneath its unusual appearance, the DUKW possessed remarkable abilities. Powered by a GMC 6-cylinder engine, it could travel roughly 50 miles per hour on roads. Then, without unloading cargo, it could drive directly into deep water. The wheels stopped pulling. The propeller engaged. Suddenly, the truck became a boat. It could carry over 2 tons of cargo, dozens of fully equipped soldiers, artillery shells, fuel drums, medical supplies, even small anti-tank guns. It eliminated one of the biggest problems in amphibious warfare. There was no need to unload cargo at the shoreline. No cranes, no docks, no waiting. Everything stayed inside the vehicle. That saved precious minutes. And in combat, minutes often meant lives. Chapter 3. The Duck proves itself. Before reaching Germany, the DUKW had already earned an impressive reputation. It landed troops in Sicily. It delivered ammunition during the invasion of Normandy. It crossed flooded terrain after storms. It rescued wounded soldiers trapped near beaches. Its versatility amazed commanders. Whenever engineers encountered water, the Duck usually found a solution. Many soldiers developed enormous confidence in the vehicle. Stories spread quickly. One DUKW rescued stranded infantry under artillery fire. Another carried medical teams through flooded villages. Some even transported tanks fueled directly across rivers where bridges had collapsed. The vehicle wasn't perfect. Strong waves could swamp it. Heavy enemy fire remained dangerous. Mechanical failures occurred. Yet compared to traditional landing craft, the DUKW offered unmatched flexibility. It didn't require special unloading equipment. It didn't need harbors. It simply kept moving. Road, river, beach, mud. Back to road again. Few military vehicles in World War II could perform so many roles. American logistics officers quickly realized something important. Winning wars wasn't only about tanks and airplanes. It was about keeping armies supplied. A tank without fuel became useless. Artillery without shells became silent. Infantry without food couldn't fight. Chapter 4. The Germans prepare for the final battle. Across the Rhine, German commanders watched the western horizon. They knew the Americans were coming. Every day, reconnaissance aircraft reported growing Allied concentrations. Thousands of trucks, hundreds of tanks, massive artillery formations, endless columns of soldiers. Still, many German officers remained optimistic. The river itself would slow the invasion, destroy the bridges, hold the riverbanks, force the Allies into predictable crossing points, then strike with concentrated artillery. It was textbook defensive warfare. German engineers spent weeks improving firing positions. Machine guns covered likely landing zones. Mortars were carefully registered. Snipers occupied church towers and factory buildings. Entire villages became defensive fortresses. For the exhausted Wehrmacht, the Rhine represented one last chance. If they could delay the Americans long enough, perhaps political disagreements among the Allies would emerge. Perhaps miracle weapons would arrive. Perhaps something, anything, would change Germany's fate. But beneath that hope, another problem quietly grew. German intelligence had become increasingly fragmented. Fuel shortages limited reconnaissance flights. Communication lines were constantly bombed. Experienced intelligence officers had been killed or captured. As a result, many frontline commanders never received complete information about America's growing fleet of amphibious vehicles. They expected assault boats, pontoon bridges, engineer units. They did not expect hundreds of trucks driving straight into the Rhine. The German defenders believed they understood exactly how the Americans would attack. They had calculated artillery ranges, prepared demolition charges, and memorized every likely crossing point. But somewhere behind the Allied lines, hundreds of strange-looking vehicles were quietly assembling. Within days, the Rhine would witness one of the most astonishing military river crossings in modern history. And the men defending Germany's last great natural barrier would discover that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the one you've completely overlooked. Chapter 5. The biggest river assault in the West. March 23, 1945. As darkness settled over the Rhine, thousands of Allied soldiers waited in silence. Engines were shut off. Radios were kept to a minimum. Even conversations became whispers. Across the river, German sentries peered into the darkness. They expected something to happen. Weeks of Allied buildup had made that obvious. But they didn't know when. And more importantly, they didn't know how. Behind the American and British front lines, one of the largest logistical operations of World War II was unfolding. Thousands of trucks carried ammunition to hidden supply dumps. Combat engineers assembled pontoon bridge sections behind camouflage nets. Medical stations prepared for thousands of casualties. Fuel depots stretched for miles. More than 1 million shells had been stockpiled for the opening bombardment. This wasn't simply another attack. It was designed to shatter Germany's last defensive line. The operation was called Operation Plunder. General Dwight D. Eisenhower approved the overall offensive, while British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery commanded the northern crossing. American, British, and Canadian forces would attack together. Their objective was straightforward: cross the Rhine, destroy organized German resistance west of the river, drive deep into northern Germany, and end the war as quickly as possible. But speed would be everything. Every hour mattered. The longer the Allies remained trapped on the western bank, the greater the chance German reserves could counterattack. That meant the assault force needed more than courage. It needed supplies. Thousands of tons of supplies. And someone had a plan to deliver them faster than anyone thought possible. Chapter 6: The vehicle Germany ignored. Several miles behind the front, rows of unusual vehicles waited beneath camouflage. Their rounded hulls reflected moonlight. Each carried ammunition, fuel, medical equipment, or infantrymen wearing heavy combat gear. To an untrained observer, they looked almost comical. Too bulky to be proper trucks. Too awkward to be proper boats. Yet these strange machines had already crossed beaches in Sicily, delivered supplies during the Normandy invasion, and carried wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire. Tonight, their greatest test was about to begin. The DUKW wasn't glamorous. It didn't carry a giant cannon like a Sherman tank. It couldn't dogfight like a P-51 Mustang. Newspapers rarely featured it. Hollywood hardly mentioned it. But experienced officers understood a simple truth. Armies don't win battles on bravery alone. They win because someone delivers food. Someone delivers ammunition. Someone delivers fuel. The DUKW existed to solve exactly that problem. Instead of unloading cargo onto barges, instead of transferring supplies from boat to truck, the Duck simply became both. It drove directly into the river, crossed under its own power, then climbed onto the opposite shore without stopping. That eliminated an enormous logistical bottleneck. And at the Rhine, that advantage could decide the outcome of the entire operation. Chapter 7: Midnight turns into fire. At exactly 9 p.m., the silence disappeared. The first artillery battery fired. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, the western horizon exploded. Thousands of Allied guns unleashed one of the most devastating bombardments of the European War. Heavy 155mm artillery, medium guns, rocket launchers, naval guns positioned along the river. The sky flashed continuously. Observers later described it as a rolling thunderstorm made entirely of fire. German defensive positions vanished beneath explosions. Telephone wires were cut almost instantly. Command bunkers shook violently. Entire forests disappeared behind clouds of smoke and shattered trees. For nearly 4 hours, the bombardment continued. Every suspected machine gun nest, every artillery position, every road intersection, every village believed to contain defenders, received concentrated fire. The goal wasn't merely destruction. It was confusion. German commanders needed to lose control of their units before the first Allied soldier reached the eastern bank. The psychological effect was enormous. Many defenders couldn't hear orders. Others believed an invasion had already begun. Some abandoned forward trenches altogether. Yet despite the overwhelming bombardment, thousands of German soldiers survived. Deep concrete shelters protected many experienced defenders. As the explosions faded, they climbed back into firing positions. They expected to see assault boats approaching. Instead, they saw something entirely unexpected. Chapter 8: The Ducks enter the Rhine. One after another, the amphibious trucks rolled toward the water. Their drivers barely slowed. Each vehicle reached the muddy shoreline and disappeared into the Rhine. The transition looked almost impossible. A military truck, simply floating. Propellers churned the cold water. The ducks formed loose columns. Some carried engineers. Others transported ammunition. Many carried infantrymen gripping their rifles tightly while enemy shells landed nearby. Machine gun fire began sweeping across the river. Tracer rounds skipped across the dark water. Mortars exploded among the waves. Several DUKWs were hit. Some drifted helplessly. Others caught fire. Yet the columns kept moving. More ducks entered the river. Then more. Behind them, even more waited their turn. German observers struggled to understand what they were seeing. These weren't ordinary landing craft. They weren't pontoon ferries. They were trucks. Trucks that floated. The very obstacle Germany had counted on was being overcome in a way few defenders had anticipated. Instead of waiting for bridges, American supplies were already crossing. Chapter 9, a constant flow of men and supplies. As the first assault troops fought their way inland, the real strength of the DUKW became obvious. Crossing the river was only the beginning. Holding the bridgehead required a continuous stream of reinforcements. Rifle ammunition disappeared quickly. Machine guns overheated. Mortar crews burned through shells at an incredible rate. Medical teams desperately needed plasma and bandages. Without resupply, even a successful landing could collapse within hours. Normally, moving supplies across a major river meant unloading boats, reloading trucks, and repeating the process endlessly. The DUKW skipped nearly every step. It arrived directly beside frontline units. Boxes of ammunition were unloaded. Wounded soldiers climbed aboard. Within minutes, the same vehicle was back in the river heading west. Round trip after round trip, hour after hour, day after day. Drivers often worked with almost no sleep. Many crossed the Rhine dozens of times while German artillery continued searching for targets. Some described the experience as driving through a hurricane made of steel. Every crossing could be the last. But stopping wasn't an option. Because every successful trip meant another American company could continue advancing deeper into Germany. Chapter 10, Germany's plan begins to collapse. By dawn, the impossible had happened. Thousands of Allied soldiers stood on the eastern bank. Engineers immediately began assembling massive pontoon bridges. With each passing hour, the bridgehead grew larger. German commanders launched local counterattacks. Some fought fiercely. Others achieved temporary success. But they all faced the same problem. The Allies never ran out of supplies. Every time German artillery destroyed equipment, more equipment arrived. Every time ammunition ran low, more ammunition appeared. The constant movement of DUKWs across the Rhine helped keep the offensive alive during its most vulnerable hours. The Germans had prepared to stop bridges. They had prepared to sink boats. But they hadn't fully appreciated what would happen when hundreds of amphibious trucks began operating as an uninterrupted supply chain. The river was no longer acting as Germany's greatest ally. It had become another obstacle the Allies were systematically overcoming. And once that happened, the road into the heart of Germany lay open. For generations, military historians focused on the tanks that crossed the Rhine, the bridges built by combat engineers, and the generals who planned the operation. But hidden behind every headline was a fleet of strange amphibious trucks that rarely received the recognition they deserved. Without them, the Allied advance could have slowed dramatically. With them, the momentum never stopped. Chapter 11, the most dangerous job on the Rhine. As daylight spread across the Rhine on March 24, 1945, the battlefield transformed. The darkness that had concealed the crossing was gone. Now every movement could be seen. Smoke drifted over the river. Burning vehicles lit the shoreline. Destroyed buildings stood like broken skeletons against the morning sky. For the American infantry pushing inland, the mission was clear. Capture villages, eliminate German strongpoints, and expand the bridgehead. But behind every advancing rifleman, another battle was being fought. The battle to keep them supplied. And at the center of that fight were the crews of the DUKW duck trucks. Unlike frontline infantry, these men didn't attack enemy trenches. They didn't charge machine gun nests. Instead, they drove the same dangerous route again, and again, and again. Every trip across the Rhine carried new ammunition, food, fuel, engineers, medical supplies, or wounded soldiers desperate to reach field hospitals. The river had become a highway, a deadly highway. German artillery observers quickly realized what was happening. The ducks weren't simply carrying troops. They were keeping the entire invasion alive. That made every DUKW a valuable target. Chapter 12, Under Constant Fire. As the first morning crossings began, German artillery finally found its range. Heavy shells crashed into the river. Columns of water shot into the air. Fragments of steel rained down on the vehicles below. Drivers couldn't stop. Stopping meant becoming an easy target. Instead, they pushed their engines harder. The DUKW wasn't armored like a tank. Its steel hull offered little protection against direct hits. Machine gun bullets could punch through its sides. Mortar fragments tore through canvas covers. Even near misses could damage steering systems or propellers. Many drivers later recalled seeing shells land only yards away. One explosion could throw a truck sideways in the current. Another could swamp the vehicle with water. Some ducks never reached the opposite shore. Others drifted helplessly after losing power. Yet despite these losses, the crossings continued. Behind every damaged vehicle, another duck entered the water. Then another. The supply line never stopped. Chapter 13, The Engineers' Race Against Time. While the ducks carried supplies, combat engineers worked around the clock. Their objective was simple in theory: build bridges. In reality, it was one of the most dangerous engineering projects of the war. Pontoon sections floated into position. Steel roadway panels were connected piece by piece. Powerboats fought the current to keep everything aligned. German artillery constantly tried to destroy the construction sites. Several bridge sections were damaged almost as soon as they appeared. Engineers repaired them under fire. If one section sank, another replaced it. The DUKWs played an unexpected role. They transported bridge materials directly to construction crews. They delivered replacement equipment. They evacuated wounded engineers. In many cases, they became floating workhorses, carrying everything needed to keep bridge construction moving. Every completed bridge meant something critical. Sherman tanks, tank destroyers, heavy artillery, thousands of trucks. Once those vehicles crossed, the Allies would no longer depend entirely on amphibious transport. But until then, the ducks carried the burden alone. Chapter 14, German counterattacks. Hitler ordered that the Rhine bridgeheads be destroyed at any cost. Local commanders gathered every available unit: infantry, paratroopers, Volkssturm militia, even training battalions. Small counterattacks erupted across the front. Some struck before dawn. Others attacked during the afternoon. German soldiers fought desperately. They understood exactly what was at stake. If the Allies established a permanent foothold east of the Rhine, the war inside Germany would accelerate dramatically. Several American positions came under intense pressure. Mortars hammered defensive lines. Machine guns swept open fields. Snipers targeted officers. Yet every time ammunition stocks began running low, another convoy of DUKWs appeared. Boxes of rifle ammunition, machine gun belts, mortar rounds, radio batteries, medical kits. The steady stream of supplies allowed American units to hold their ground. The German attacks gradually lost momentum, not because the defenders lacked courage, but because they lacked time, fuel, and reinforcements. The Allies possessed something Germany could no longer match: an overwhelming logistical system. And the DUKW had become one of its most important links. Chapter 15, More than a supply vehicle. The ducks soon found themselves performing missions no one had originally planned. Several crossed the river carrying doctors and surgeons. Others transported portable radio stations. Some hauled bulldozers used to clear roads. One moment, a DUKW might carry artillery shells. The next, it carried wounded soldiers lying side by side on stretchers. Many American medics later praised the vehicle. Its ability to travel directly from frontline evacuation points to hospitals without transferring patients saved precious minutes. For severely wounded soldiers, those minutes often meant the difference between life and death. The ducks also rescued stranded troops from flooded areas, recovered damaged equipment, delivered drinking water, and carried military police, establishing traffic control on the crowded eastern bank. Few vehicles in World War II proved so adaptable. Chapter 16, The Psychological Blow. For German defenders, the greatest surprise wasn't simply seeing trucks floating across the Rhine. It was realizing they couldn't stop the flow. Destroy one vehicle, two more appeared. Damage a crossing route, engineers repaired it. Target a bridge, supplies still arrived by water. The American advance seemed unstoppable. Several captured German officers later admitted they had underestimated Allied logistics. They expected delays. They expected shortages. Instead, they watched an almost continuous stream of men and equipment crossing the river. The psychological effect was enormous. Every hour the bridgehead survived made German victory less likely. Every successful crossing proved that the Rhine was no longer an effective defensive barrier. For centuries, the Rhine had protected Germany. Now, it was being crossed day and night by vehicles few defenders had even considered a serious threat. Chapter 17, Momentum cannot be stopped. By the end of March 24th, the Allied bridgehead had expanded significantly. More bridges opened. More tanks rolled east. Columns of Sherman tanks finally began moving across pontoon bridges. Behind them came fuel trucks, artillery, ambulances, repair vehicles. The battlefield changed rapidly. The DUKWs were no longer the only crossing method, but they had performed the most critical task. They had sustained the invasion during its most vulnerable hours. Without that uninterrupted supply chain, The first assault forces might have been isolated. German counterattacks could have gained valuable time. Instead, the Allies never lost momentum. The crossing of the Rhine became not only a tactical success, but a logistical masterpiece. Chapter 18. The gates to Germany were open. By the morning of March 25, 1945, the impossible had become reality. What German military planners had hoped would become a prolonged, bloody struggle had instead turned into a rapidly expanding Allied breakthrough. The Rhine, Germany's greatest natural defensive barrier, had been breached. Across newly built pontoon bridges, endless columns of Sherman tanks rumbled eastward. Heavy artillery batteries followed. Fuel convoys stretched for miles. Bulldozers repaired roads damaged by retreating German forces. Above them, Allied fighter aircraft patrolled the skies almost without opposition. The bridgehead was no longer fragile. It was becoming unstoppable. And quietly, almost unnoticed amid the roar of tanks and artillery, the DUKWs continued their work. While headlines celebrated armored divisions and airborne assaults, the Ducks kept delivering the essentials that every army depends on. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every crate of rations, every wounded soldier carried back to safety. The victory belonged not only to the men at the front, but also to the countless drivers, engineers, mechanics, and logisticians who ensured the offensive never lost momentum. Chapter 19. Germany begins to collapse. For Adolf Hitler's commanders, the situation was becoming hopeless. The Western Allies were advancing from the west. The Soviet Red Army was closing in from the east. Germany's remaining fuel reserves were nearly exhausted. More artillery, more fuel, more trucks, more food, and perhaps most importantly, a logistical system capable of sustaining continuous offensive operations. The Rhine had been Germany's final chance to slow that machine. When the Allies crossed it successfully, the outcome of the war became increasingly inevitable. Chapter 20. The DUKW's greatest strength. Looking back, it's easy to focus on famous weapons. The Sherman tank, the P-51 Mustang, the B-17 Flying Fortress. These machines became symbols of Allied victory. But wars are rarely won by famous weapons alone. Military historians often say, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. The DUKW perfectly embodied that principle. It wasn't designed to destroy enemy tanks. It wasn't built to dominate the skies. Its mission was much simpler. Keep the army moving. That mission proved invaluable across every major campaign where water posed an obstacle. In Sicily, the Ducks carried men and supplies directly from ships to shore. In Normandy, they unloaded cargo even when ports had been destroyed. In France, they crossed flooded rivers and canals. And at the Rhine, they helped sustain one of history's largest river crossing operations. Their flexibility saved time. Their versatility saved lives. Their reliability helped maintain the relentless pace of the Allied advance. Chapter 21. The men behind the machines. Every DUKW had a crew. Drivers, mechanics, loadmasters, engineers. Many had little idea that history would remember the crossing they were about to make. Their work lacked the dramatic glory often associated with combat troops. Yet they faced danger every single trip. Artillery didn't distinguish between infantry and supply drivers. Machine guns didn't care whether a vehicle carried soldiers or ammunition. Every crossing required courage. Some crews completed dozens of trips. Others never returned. Many vehicles were damaged. Some were destroyed. Yet replacements kept arriving. The men climbed into another duck, started the engine, and crossed the Rhine once again. Their names rarely appeared in newspapers. Many received little public recognition after the war. But countless frontline soldiers later acknowledged one simple truth. Without supplies, there is no victory. Chapter 22. A forgotten hero of World War II. After the war ended in Europe on May 8, 1945, the DUKW didn't disappear overnight. Thousands remained in military service. Some served during occupation duties. Others were deployed to the Pacific Theater. Later, during the Korean War, they again proved invaluable. Many surplus DUKWs found entirely new lives. Civil defense organizations used them during floods. Coastal rescue teams adopted them for emergency operations. Tourism companies converted them into sightseeing vehicles. For decades, visitors in cities around the world climbed aboard retired military ducks for land and water tours. Few realized they were riding in a machine that had once crossed rivers under enemy fire. A vehicle born from war had become part of everyday civilian life. It was a remarkable transformation. Chapter 23. The legacy of the Rhine crossing. Military academies still study the Rhine crossing today, not simply because it succeeded, but because it demonstrated the importance of planning, coordination, engineering, and logistics. Operation Plunder combined nearly every element of modern warfare: massive artillery, air superiority, airborne assaults, combat engineers, armored forces, naval support, and innovative amphibious transport. Each element depended upon the others. Remove any one of them, and the operation becomes far more difficult. The DUKW reminds us that victory is rarely achieved by a single breakthrough or heroic charge. Instead, it is often built upon thousands of smaller actions performed by ordinary people under extraordinary circumstances. Chapter 24. The river that could not stop an army. For centuries, the Rhine symbolized protection. Empires defended it. Kings respected it. Generals feared it. But in March 1945, the river met an army unlike any before it. An army whose strength extended beyond tanks and aircraft. An army powered by factories, engineers, mechanics, truck drivers, bridge builders, and supply crews. The German defenders had prepared for bridges. They had prepared for assault boats. They had prepared for artillery. What many failed to anticipate was the speed with which the Allies could adapt. The strange amphibious trucks they dismissed as little more than odd-looking transports became one more reason the Rhine could not halt the Allied advance. Sometimes history changes because of revolutionary weapons. Sometimes because of brilliant generals. And sometimes because someone invented a truck that could also float. The forgotten machines that helped end a war. When people remember the final months of World War II in Europe, they often picture Sherman tanks racing across Germany, paratroopers descending from the sky, or soldiers raising victory flags. Those moments deserve their place in history. But hidden behind every famous photograph was an immense logistical effort. One built by ordinary Americans performing extraordinary work. The DUKW was never the largest weapon. It was never the fastest. It was never the most powerful. Yet it quietly solved one of warfare's oldest problems. How do you keep an army moving when nature itself stands in the way? At the Rhine, that answer arrived on 6 wheels, with a propeller beneath the hull. The German defenders never expected it, and by the time they understood its importance, the Allies were already across. The Rhine had fallen. The road into Germany was open, and the final chapter of World War II in Europe had begun. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to discover more untold stories of World War II, from forgotten weapons and secret missions to the soldiers whose actions changed history, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we uncover remarkable moments that history almost forgot. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.